Do you have a private capital, private equity entrepreneur that you admire?
You may be surprised with the person I took because it's not someone that you see in the newspaper. That's a bit a tribute to one of the GP that we have in portfolio. It's the founder of Archimed, so Denis Ribon. And actually, it was quite bold because actually Archimed, how they built their success, they started with a low and mid-market fund, raised fund 1, fund 2, and just quickly after fund 2, they say, oh, by the way, with our strategy, with what we do, there is a gap to fill. But a lot of managers, they go down or they launch a venture strategy or growth strategy and say, okay, I'm going to raise like an upper mid-market fund. So actually to triple the fund size of the previous one, or let's say launch a new fund series. I think it was relatively bold. Back then. But again, all the ingredients were set at the beginning because even when they were very small, 150 million of AUM, 5 people, they always branded the processes. They branded their internal process are branded in how they look at things, how they create value, how they source. So actually, they could make this step because to scale, because the ingredients were there and the vision was actually bold.
But you think that individual had such a role within the achievement of accomplishment of that? Because you said there's a team there, but was a real...
No, he had a vision and he had also the building blocks to make something relatively solid that can scale rapidly and to attract also more capital. So of course it was not a straight line, but still I think Archimed is one of the, in the European private equity, one of the fastest scale up. Again, I mean, I need to check my stats, but I think it's one of the fastest scale up that we have seen in European private equity buyout. And so not someone you see in the newspaper.
For me, so David Bonderman, who founded TPG, who is like the definition of a sort of pioneer in this space in terms of when you look at what TPG is today, but also just that's the story in terms of the building of that firm and the types of deal they were doing. But I think for me, it's also there is always with these groups the sort of human that's there as well that is also interested in other things. And he was famously a bit of a polymath. So he did a lot in sport and in music. He studied law in Cairo. For me, a kind of inspiration that you can be entrepreneurial outside of law. Like he used to be an attorney for the first, I think, 5 years of his career, and has gone on to be really successful in private equity, and has played such a huge role. And I think TPG now, and I don't necessarily know if there's a context, because I know that TPG was essentially a sort of family office spin out, and they were entrepreneurs at heart. They were not sitting finance courses and famously just didn't really believe that was even necessary when they were doing it. They approached things from a very different perspective that was much more about problem solving and interesting opportunities to grow businesses. But TPG's got a really great strategy in the form of Rise, which is doing amazing things in climate and sort of really pioneering there. But also in the context of emerging managers, TPG Next, which is I think they define it more around. We were talking about the emerging manager definition. Generally in the US, there's also this sense of more diverse managers and different underrepresented backgrounds. And I think that's very much the case for TPG Next. But you look at, they recently announced, and it's a great case study for any emerging manager to look at sort of just something done really, really well. They were the kind of cornerstone seeder, actually, because they do that's something that they do in a new fund called Ardebel that is an amazing new setup that's going after sustainability, but with a real interesting thesis around ecosystem connectivity and things like that. So TPG's got to evolve to go on to do interesting things there, and I would be fascinated to sort of dive into a bit more of the context there, given that the founding team was sort of that nature back in, I think it was 1994, TPG's first fund, quite a big one, I think about 700 million USD. And it stuck with me because I remember sort of listening about a story being told about that first fund, and on the cover of that pitch deck, they had contrarianism, complexity and change. And that was their sort of pitch, right? And this is 1994, TPG sort of in its rawest stage. And they just sort of did something that really was innovative, I think, in the ecosystem. And David Bonderman, clearly just this real legend of the space that I would have jumped at the chance to have ever met the guy. He seems like a really incredible character and a great inspiration.
Great choices. And guys, thank you so much. What a great launch pad for Fund Shack's Emerging Manager series. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you both.